Okay. One final thing that we have is our poll. So this year, we did not have a fall managers meeting. Instead, we had a webinar, a targeted webinar focusing on some tasks or topics, and we've been utilizing our web chats. But we know that many folks have said that maybe they would like to have a managers meeting this next fall or fall 2018. And so what we'd like to do is to gather evidence and to get your opinions. We're having a poll. We're going to launch a poll in just a minute here to get your feedback on whether or not we should have a fall managers meeting for 2018. So I'm going to launch the poll. Should only take you a couple seconds to actually complete the poll. How many questions are there, Astrid?
Just one.
Just one question, so it should not take you long at all. I'm going to launch the poll now. Give you a little bit more time to vote. Got about 75% of the people vote thus far. We're going to close the poll here in probably about 5-10 seconds.
I see that Caroline asked for an other category. If you've got a suggestion for an other, go ahead and type that in the chat. We'll take those suggestions into consideration. Are you going to show us the results?
Yep. Okay, closing the poll now.
So it looks like, well, yeah, 49% for a full day meeting. And we, looking at our packed calendar for the fall, identified a couple of dates that might work and not conflict with other events. 42% looking for information via webinar, and just a couple of you saying, no, we don't. So if you have we'll take this into consideration with our planning. So if you have other suggestions that you'd like to offer, please go ahead and put those in the chat box.
Perfect. Okay.
And then Patty's got a question. If they do CCRS training this coming year in 18-19, we can wait to do diploma in 2019-20.
Absolutely, yes, that is correct, Patty. That you can apply this time if you're planning on doing the CCRS cohort in 18-19. You can apply now and attend that training, and you could even attend the training next year in May again, or you could apply in spring of 2019 or even after that. So, yep, you don't have to apply right now.
But you cannot launch your programming until you've completed the CCRS training.
Exactly. Yep. And also, just going back to the poll, thank you for all of your additional suggestions. We've seen additional suggestions such as embedding something within regionals for the fall, or a half-day in-person meeting, and some other options. Great. Now I'm going to turn it over to Julie to help us talk a little bit about NCIS and Bridge to Benefits.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm trying to figure out a little more, get some idea of how many people across the state are using MCIS, which is the Minnesota Career and Information System. But there was an adult version created about 2 years ago, partially funded with, I believe, we incentive funding, and to specifically address needs of adult learners. We cut out a lot of the higher level information, kept the reading level at a doable level, and simplified it overall. So I'm curious how many people out there or how many people on this webinar are currently using it within their program. And I'd like you just to chat in the chat if you're using it and how you're using it. And you can do that now. I just want to let people know that one of the pieces that is unique about this is that it does include a personal learning plan embedded in the adult version. So as the student is working on different pieces, that is automatically imported into their personal learning plan. So it's something that we see helping address the advising component a little bit that people are oftentimes asking for. So is anyone using it so far?
Yep, we're getting some responses from folks. Emily Watts noted that they are using it a lot with their adult diploma programming.
Okay. That's
and they are offering it to other ABE students as well. Some teachers in ABE use it more than others.
Okay, all right.
And then Tammy was saying in Moorhead that they just started using it, and they're going to be using it for standard adult diploma as well, and as needed in other classes.
Okay.
Patty Fleet has a question. Julie, you maybe want to scroll down to, because I feel like I should know more about this. I'm sure you've presented on it in the past. Is it something that workforce providers have access to?
That's a good question, Patty. Across the state, there are some workforce providers who have also purchased this. And it's something that you could consider going in and purchasing, I would think, with your workforce center. It's a great tool for them to use as well. And I would think the counselors at workforce centers would be very interested in this. And definitely, you probably do remember that Beth Huckaboo and Dorothy Wolf did come to a regional transitions meeting and talked about it. They've been at Summer Institute presenting, and they also have a table at Summer Institute presenting the information. MCIS is commonly used within K-12 throughout Minnesota, and this is just kind of the adult version that we're trying to promote and get people to use and provide feedback on how it's working for them within their programs. If there's stuff that they want to see in there, we can add it. If there's stuff that would make it easier, we're always looking for feedback so that this is a tool that people can use, and it will be an ongoing tool because, as you know, iSeek has gone away, and then Minnesota State and D divided up their separate pieces of iSeek, and each have their own information systems. Well, this is kind of one tailored to the adult learner.
And Carolyn Nerhost is asking about cost. Julie, do you know off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head. I could possibly send something out to all. I'm wondering if I should send it to all managers. They did develop a sheet. They like, if you contact them in person and you talk to them, they can give you a better estimate of what the cost might be. I know initially they came out with a sheet, but they've adjusted it. Oh yeah, where is that?
I'll put the link. There is a link to this information went out in our PD newsletter back in October. I'll put the link to that article in the chat so people can take a look at that.
And you may note that Emily from OSSEO just chatted in that the cost for OSSEO was about $300.
Yeah, so it is pretty reasonable. I think you can. They're willing to work work with you on how many learners you serve, et cetera. So, yeah.
Yeah, Penny Janke says, for 100 users or less, it's $100.
Okay. Penny, I was going to have you, that's all right. Just chat in. I'd be interested in how you're using it as well, because I do know you guys use it down there.
Perfect.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll go back and read all those comments, and it's something that we're going to, I think, continue to support in the future and try to improve as we move along. The other program I wanted to get more information about is Bridge to Benefits. As you know, last January, we provided some seed money for several programs to begin using Bridge to Benefits and try to integrate that into their orientations or their intake. So since then, again, we've promoted this. They've been at Summer Institute presenting. They've been at the Spark conference presenting. I'm curious to know how many people that are currently on the web chat are using Bridge to Benefits or know that their program is using Bridge to Benefits. This tool we see as sort of a navigation tool in connecting learners to other resources that would support them, possibly if they're taking career pathway courses, or just support them in general, even in attending adult basic education courses.
Kelly, I see that you've got your hand up. I'm going to unmute you, so if you'd like to share or ask a question, you can go ahead. And you are muted on your end as well, so you'll need to unmute your microphone.
Hi, we're gonna start using Bridge to Benefits with our Opportunity Navigator. So,
oh, fantastic! Good.
I'm gonna unmute.
Thanks, Kelly.
Excellent. That's helpful to know.
I see Sarah's using it. Any larger programs within the metro area? Are there any larger programs that are using it as well? Laura, okay. Well, just want to encourage people looking into this as a tool to connect your learners to possible resources within the community or supports for them.
I just want to follow up on one train of comments that are going in about MCIS. Tracy was asking about training with that, and the response to that was that there are staff here at the Department of Education that will come out and do training with local programs for free as state agency staff. But there is not training for MCIS as part of the CCI cohort, or is there?
There is not.
There is not. Okay, that's what I thought. Yep. Yeah. Perfect.
And when Brad mentioned MDE staff, not adult basic education staff, but there's 3 staff that just work here at the Department of Education on the Minnesota Career Information System, and they do the training.
Yeah, and they work with high schools, colleges, and other entities, including ABE. Yeah, excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Those comments will be really helpful for us as we compile all of that and kind of continue to research.
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jody to talk about program quality.
All right, so kind of a reminder, I've been talking about this for a little while, but finally kind of starting to get a little bit of traction around this project. So I'm working towards ultimately the development of program quality standards to kind of define what program quality looks like in our programs. And as one first step, there's an online kind of discussion group that's gotten started. It's in Schoology. We have close to 30 people in the group now. And so we just started with a few discussion questions in December. And it's a really great group of people. I'm feeling really positive about the possibility for some really interesting idea exchange. So I invite anyone who is interested who isn't yet part of that group to join in. There's information here on this slide about how to do that. Or if it's easier, just shoot me an email and I can send it to you in an email. So the idea for this group is to just kind of gather and share some knowledge and understanding and ideas about what quality programming looks like on a day-to-day basis in our classrooms and in our programs. And can you go on to the next slide, Brad? One thing that is coming out of this as conversations started in December is that I think in addition to sort of idea sharing and idea gathering, I think this can be a potentially a good place for people to be able to exchange some resources. So I just gave you a screenshot here of some of the things that are currently living in this group in the resources section. So some documents having to do with program quality in a couple of our different programs. And then there's been a little conversation going on about using student surveys and how we get input and opinions from students. So we've had some folks in the field who have shared some examples of student surveys that they use. So if you join the group, you can take a look at any of those resources. You are certainly welcome to join the group just to look at those resources. But I welcome you and encourage you to participate in discussions as well. So this is totally optional, open to anybody who is interested in participating, and certainly not just open to managers, but teachers or support staff or anyone in our field who wants to sort of give their 2 cents on some of these questions. So go ahead and join the group if you'd like to. Any questions or issues that you have, you can contact me directly.
Great. There is a question from one of our audience members. Andrea asks, how do you get a login to Schoology? So
Andrea, Schoology is a free site. You go to Schoology.com and sign up for an account, and then there's a code that you enter. It's probably easiest. It is on the slide, a couple of slides back. So if you download the PowerPoint from the materials, you can see it. There it is, that access code. Or if it's easier, just shoot me an email, and I will just send that all to you in an email. It's not hard, and it's free.
Is it Schoology.com or Schoology.org?
.com, I believe.
It is
I believe it's .com.
Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you, Jody.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's do a follow-up to our accountability discussion that we had last month. So there are a couple pieces that we really wanted to share and just provide some additional insight on. First off, with testing, I just want to, this is a reminder that we do not have there are no new CASAS tests that have been approved by the feds. So there's no news there in that sense. And what likely there will not be any new CASAS tests approved starting July 1, 2018. It will still be the current CASAS test for July 1, 2018. TABE, however, the TABE 11 and 12 has been approved, and now it is currently available this week, so we can now start working with our test trainers and our SID staff, our SID support to try to evaluate the training or the test and to see whether we want to approve it. The TABE 11 and 12 has computer and paper-based versions. They have 3 tests, a reading test, a math test, and a language test. And unlike the 9 and 10 that have a survey and a complete battery, there's only one option with the new tests. So you don't have, you can't do the shorter version with the new TABE test. So you will have to think about that as you plan testing sessions. Your testing sessions will likely have to be longer if you are using the survey, especially if you are using the survey. The TABE is also saying that they are going to start, DRC is going to start, or they're going to drop their support for TABE 9 and 10 probably in potentially as early as July 1, 2019 or around 2019. So that might mean that we would no longer approve TABE 9 and 10 starting July 1, 2019 for any new students or any official pre or post testing purposes. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what you might need to be thinking about in terms of budgeting, training, and other program planning with your tests. So in the comments, I'd really love to hear now if any of you have already taken a look at TABE 11 and 12, because we'd like to just get any feedback from you if you have had a chance to take a look at TABE 11 and 12 yet.
We could also unmute folks if you want to share that, if that's an easier way to share what you saw.
Yeah. So you can keep entering that information in, no problem. We have a couple more slides on TABE as we go here. There was a question of, or there are thoughts about like, oh, what does that review process look like? And so we're working with SPARC, our support professional committee, as well as our test trainers, as well as our SID, our database support staff, to help formulate a bit of a quick review of the test itself. We probably are not going to make anything any more formal than some quick looks with those groups. But within SID, we need to make sure that we have it all prepped within the database. And within our test trainers, we need to make sure that they're ready to train for the new test. And that's why we're engaging those folks in this process. And Ralu, you were talking about it's good to know, yeah, they definitely have been providing sample questions at various events, including Summer Institute. And so Sarah, you also have seen some of those sample questions. So, and Sarah's noting that there are some issues that they're concerned about the vowel sounds, and that's at a level E, which is the easy level. And so they're saying that they're talking about vowel sounds there. So that might be a challenge, or that might not be a feasible assessment then in a case like that for deaf or hard of hearing students. Sarah, we might want to engage you more in this conversation, so let's be in touch. I'm glad you had a chance to look at that, Sarah. Okay. Yes, Scott, there are paper options for this test. You can either do the computer-based or the paper-based. Okay, continuing and comparing TABE 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. TABE 9 and 10 are not considered the same test as 11 and 12 for data purposes. So that means if you have a student that pre-test in 9 or 10, that student you cannot use in 11 or 12 as a post-test once we approve it for our purposes, potentially starting July 1, 2018. If you give them a TABE 11 and 12, that would be considered a new pre-test with a new level. It also means that you do not then have to wait 40 contact hours before taking an 11 and 12 to create that new pre-test to determine a student's level. So maybe you could give it to all of your students July 1 if you bought the test, were trained on the test, and were ready to go July 1. But it also means that you don't have to move that fast. You do have a little bit of opportunity here to do some planning. And so that's our challenge to you today, is that we really want you to start thinking about what your training and transition for the test will look like. When, specifically for TABE, but maybe even thinking about costs longer term, when are you thinking about purchasing those tests? How will you make sure that your staff and programs are trained on those tests? And how will you implement them? Maybe you're going to do a different implementation timeline for current students that have pre-test, and maybe you're going to start a little earlier, though, for new students when you're doing intakes. So you might want to start doing some planning and some thinking about when you're going to implement those, purchase, train, and implement those tests. So think about that as we go forward. And there's a question on whether training will be offered at Summer Institute this summer. We believe so. The Summer Institute is operated by Literacy Action Network, but our test trainers always submit proposals for test training sessions. So I would think that there will be training and certification available at Summer Institute, as well as at the SPARC conference in this fall in November. And Sylvia's asking if Marty will still be able to come to sites, still be available. And yes, she is available to come out. We still plan on having assessment trainers as part of our supplemental service projects. Those grants are up for review, of course, this year. But yes, our test trainers will be available. And Marty confirms that she is available. Thank you, Marty. Okay. That's all we have for tests. Any questions you have about tests, please let us know in the chat function. But let's move on to our other accountability topic, data. Todd, can you tell us a little bit about the report card?
Just that we'll hopefully be releasing a report card here in the next week or so. It'll be the same structure as report cards in the past. It will look at just level change, not the whole measurable skill gain set that we reported on this last year. So it will be based on the report in SID that everybody is able to run that still looks at just level change, essentially creates a table but for level change only. And so anyway, same format as we've used in the past, and we hope that have that available for folks here in the next week or so.
Excellent. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Todd. We do want to then also follow up with some of the things that you should have received from Mary Zimmerly. So if you look into the materials file right now, I would just want to highlight the materials file. If you look at that tab within the toolbar for the webinar, you will see that there's an MN ABE accountability update sheet. This is the same information that Mary Zimmerly sent out in an email to her list, but we put it into worksheet form so that we could share it with all of you and kind of we could follow up on some of these key topics. So first one, item 1, if you pull up that sheet, the first item is about MFIP. And this is just reminding you that we're relaxing the rules and the stress that we had about MFIP and MFIP timelines or due dates. What we are now asking local programs to do as part of their intake with new students is to ask students when your MFIP benefits end. If they know, enter that field into SID. If they don't know, you do not need to start hunting it down specially or doing a special mission or having them hunt it down themselves. You can just leave that blank. That is okay. And we've got that guidance confirmed from the feds now too. So that's wonderful. So hopefully that will ease your intake stress and follow-ups.
And then Brad, just to go back to the assessment information briefly, people I think need some clarification. Penny asked just to confirm this is already decided we'll be using TABE 11 and 12 starting July 1, 2018.
So the likely answer is yes, but it's not 100%. We want to give a solid definitive answer by March.
Yeah. So just the way to think about that process is that publishers submit to the Federal Department of Education assessments that they'd like to have reviewed for approval. The Department of Education periodically conducts a review process, posts approvals in the Federal Register. Once a test has been approved by the feds, essentially the requirement is that states then also review those tests, conduct their own review process as part of adopting those tests. So we have an obligation to, even though the feds have already approved the 11-12, we have an obligation as a state to conduct our own review, which is Brad's describing we have in process, and we should have a clear answer for everybody. As Brad said, it's quite likely we will approve the use of the 11-12, and we'll have that decision out to folks in plenty of time for people to make any purchasing decisions they might want to make still within this fiscal year.
Yeah. But it's important to note that programs are not allowed to use it officially before July 1st. We have to. So you're going to roll your eyes at this bureaucracy, but not only do the feds have to approve the test, and do we need to go through our own review of the test, but we also do, this part's not bureaucracy, but we need to make sure our test trainers are ready to train to the new test, and we need to make sure our database is able to accommodate the new tests. In addition to that, though, we need to submit our annual assessment policy, and that needs to be approved by the feds, and that's effective July 1. And so that means that, and that includes which tests we've permitted. And TABE 11 and 12 is we submitted for approval by the feds, but we will likely not hear back from them until March about whether or not that's approved.
And just to clarify, while we will likely approve the use of the new test starting in July, programs will still be able to use the old test for a period of time, potentially until July 1 of the following year, 2019. So you can plan for your own transition.
Yep, exactly. And really the simplest way to make that transition typically would be that folks who tested within, who at entry tested with the TABE 910 would continue with the 910 series until they exited. And hopefully in most cases that would be within the next program year. And then at some point, programs ideally would just pick a start date after which any entering new student would take the new test version, the 1112, and they would continue forward from there. So as Brad noted earlier, the two test forms, the 910 and the 1112, are not officially equated to each other. And so to get consistent results from pre-test to post-test, you need to continue to test within the system within which the students started. So that's a really easy, I think a relatively easy way anyway to make that transition, and as a process that we've used in the past and has worked pretty well for folks. So.
And so once you hear from us in March, what that means is starting July 1st, 2018, you could start using TABE 11 and 12, but that also means that quite likely you may need to fully transition your program by July 1st, 2019. So you have a year basically to figure out when you're going to transition from the 910 to the 1112, most likely, depending on our decision that will be released in March.
And we just had a question about whether or not the 40-hour rule would apply. And the answer to that is it does not apply if you're switching between a 910 and an 1112. So there are states, and it's possible that we could have programs in Minnesota that might choose, for example, to purchase the 1112 to have it available as of July 1st, and then might choose to just retest everybody to get everybody onto the new test form. And that would be acceptable to do that. That would essentially be establish the student's entering educational functioning level for the 18-19 program year, and then you would be post-testing from that point forward with the 11-12. So that is certainly an option as well.
But the 40-hour requirement is still in effect.
Yes, that is still part of our policy.
Yep. Yeah, so if you're testing within the same series, going from a TABE 9 to a TABE 10 back to a TABE 9, they're still, or same with the new series. If you're going from a TABE 11 to a 12 back to 11, there always has to be at least 40 hours between those test administrations.
But no, they do not need 40 hours before you transition from the 910 to the 11-12.
Correct. So the question, somebody asked a question about if anyone knows the administration time for the new tests, and I don't.
I've heard it's somewhere around 70 to 75, around 70 or 75 minutes, I believe, for and Marty, maybe you can kind of chime in via chat on that, but I believe it's around 70, 75 minutes for each of the tests. We have one more question. In terms of the transition from one test to another, how will that work when you have a student that's enrolled in multiple consortia? Admittedly, what that means is, Marty's saying that the reading test is 2 hours. So it's actually a much longer test now, especially on the reading side. Excellent. Not excellent that it's that long, but excellent for that you were able to, that you had that information. I appreciate that. Math is 85 minutes. Thank you, Linda. So you can see these tests are definitely longer than the survey, but even longer than the complete battery. And Brent, there will not be a survey option.
And Sylvia had a question about when a student is switching from one consortium to another, and we're bringing that, the new consortium is bringing that record across. That's a great question. I think we haven't really had a chance to fully think through how that will work, but thank you for reminding us. We'll definitely take that into consideration and consult with test trainers and with SID folks, and make sure that we've got guidance out there for everybody on how to make sure, or how to make those transitions work.
Luckily, what that means, though, since TABE 11 and 12 are kind of almost like a different test than TABE 9 and 10, if one consortium is starting early with that and another consortium is starting later, Consortium A that started earlier, they could have the test maybe in 18-19 that whole year. They could have the students that Consortium A and B are sharing. They could be utilizing TABE 11 and 12, and still Consortium B could still be using TABE 9 and 10, and that they would be on parallel tracks in terms of their testing. That would be allowable, but you cannot get a level gain from a 9-10 based off the 11-12. You can't mix and match in that sense. But in essence, it would be like if you have someone that's taking a TABE reading test and a CASAS math test. They're on just parallel testing tracks. Okay. And thank you, Linda, as well, for noting that the language test is 95 minutes. So yeah, we're going 85, 95, and 120 minutes. Those are long tests. We have some additional questions and thoughts. Karen is asking if this is accurate, that the 11-12 tests are 40 questions as opposed to 25 currently on the surveys. Time is much longer. So yeah, I do believe that the question that does sound correct, Karen, that there may be, while the test takes 85 to 120 minutes, that there may be only there are more questions, but not one question. It's not considered to be one question per minute like the survey is. And the reasoning for that, especially in the reading, is that the reading test utilizes much longer, more rigorous text as part of their assessment, and that's why the test takes longer. So to do one question takes longer than with the current TABE series, 9 to 10. Okay. Any other questions on TABE and testing before we move back to data? Karen, I think that's a good summary. Don't stress out yet. You can tell your staff not to stress out yet, because it could depend on how long people actually take on the test. And the other thing is, this is why we're asking folks to really start thinking about your planning and your transitioning now. If those tests are longer, that will be a special consideration. I know I've heard from jail programs that say, well, we don't have students for 120 minutes. How are we going to do this? And so I think this will require some special, some additional work logistically to figure out.
And also just to note, from what we've heard from folks who have seen the test, they are very closely aligned to the CCRS standards. So I think we're definitely on the right track with all of the professional development work that you've all been doing around the standards, and just encourage you to continue moving forward with your instructors on implementing those standards so that you're ready when the tests go into effect.
Okay, well, if you have additional testing questions, we can take those at the end of the session, but I think we'll go right back into data and talk about Social Security numbers. So on the handout, in the materials section, you'll notice that item 2 is about Social Security number collections. Todd, do you want to talk about Social Security numbers?
Sure. So as you all know, there are a set of follow-up outcomes that we have to collect and report on to the Federal Department of Education as part of the National Reporting System. And we are fortunate enough in Minnesota to be able to do that follow-up via data matching. We do data matching with both the post-secondary system and also with Department of Employment and Economic Development. And it's certainly, there are a number of states that, for various reasons, many actually have state legal requirements that prohibit them from collecting and using Social Security numbers. And consequently, in those states, they spend a lot of money on doing a phone follow-up survey with students in order to get the reporting data. And so there's a long-standing requirement, however, from the feds that we have Social Security numbers for at least half of the students for whom we are matching in order to have a valid, essentially a valid sample. And in fact, unlike in past years where they're going to allow us to basically use our sample percentage as the percentage that we report, going forward, we are going to have to report the total proportion of students for whom we know an outcome was achieved. So for example, if it's the obtain employment outcome, we will have to follow up on 100% of students who enter reporting that they are unemployed. And so the first limiter on that is going to be the number of students we have available for data match. And when we match to the unemployment records to find out who in fact is working, we have to have a Social Security number to make that match. So any student who doesn't have a Social Security number will automatically show up in our reporting to the feds as not having met that goal, not having achieved that outcome. And so we currently have Social Security numbers for just over 60% of students in the data system. And we have done some asking around in states that do survey follow-up and have found that under sort of best circumstances, they typically get to a response rate of about 70%. And so we have set a target of 70% as a goal to have a Social Security number for at least 70% of the students in our system. And that should ensure that we'll have adequate numbers to continue to do data matching without having to do any sort of survey follow-up, and that we'll get outcome data for a reasonable chunk of all the folks who participate in adult basic ed. So I guess the biggest change here is that in the past, we've only followed up with a subset of students. And going forward, we need to do follow-up on all of the students in the data system. And that's why it's so critical that we be getting Social Security numbers for as many students as possible. So given that, the recommendation then really is that, go ahead, Brett, if you want to switch. So would be to just follow the process that I'm sure essentially all of you have been doing for many years now, that is provided for in Minnesota state statute, which is that we start by giving a Tennyson warning to all students. That's required for any of the data that we collect. It's like a Miranda warning, so it really should occur. Basically, you're saying to the student, here's the data I'm going to collect, here's why I'm going to collect it, here are the consequences for you, here's how I'm going to use it, here's the consequences for you if you don't provide that information. It's a warning up front. It's not a permission that the student is giving you after you've collected data, but rather it's a warning to say, if you give me this information, this is how I'm going to use it. So you give the Tennyson warning, collect all the intake information, including we have the statutory authority in the ABE statutes to ask students to provide a Social Security number, and certainly as part of the Tennyson warning, and then perhaps even a supplement to that, we can be explaining to students how we use that number and why it's important that we have that follow-up information, we use it to show that the ABE programming has value, helps ensure continuing funding, and it saves us a lot of money on survey follow-up that can go, rather than being spent on survey follow-up, it's staff time that can go to direct services. So be sure and ask all students for that Social Security number. Certainly, if a student chooses not to provide it, you would still provide them with service as you would any other student. And then, follow the procedures within the data system for entering that data. So, and there will then be, there actually is a program summary report within SID that you can use to monitor the proportion of students for whom you have Social Security numbers. If you have questions about any of that, I would suggest, with regard to SID, please follow up, reference the resource sheet that Brad has posted with the chat, and contact Mary Zimmerly if you have questions.
Perfect. So a couple of follow-up questions. I'm going to start with Cindy Walters. You're asking where the program summary report is in SID. If you go to the handout in materials, it actually has a three-step process to find the program summary report within SID. I would read through that, but it probably would be quite boring for me to talk about how to go to the Reports tab, Demographics Report section, and click finding the report there.
She's wondering where on that report she can find it. I wonder.
Yep. If you go, it's also on the handout. It's step 3. There is Social Security number on the File tab. If you look for the percentages in the yes row. But I encourage you to use this handout where you can actually see the screenshot and it explains it for you.
And then someone's wondering if this requirement includes corrections.
It does include corrections because that is used for other purposes. Correction students, until they're released, are not tracked for employment, but upon release, might be tracked for employment. So we do ask that Social Security numbers are entered. And
we do track for folks who are incarcerated in short-term correction settings, county or local corrections. We are doing follow-up with those students in the same way that we are with all other ABE participants, particularly because such a large number of those folks are actually on work release programs and are working while they're incarcerated.
And Raul was noting about an issue that I know we talked about at our Spark conference as well, that some staff, especially with intake forms, those intake forms are being driven around in someone's car before they get entered into a database. And ultimately, that's going to be something that the local program needs to figure out how to safely and securely deal with, because that is, you definitely do not want to have a situation where a bunch of intakes are stolen and where your students' identities could be stolen. So you need to make sure that your data is secure. And I think that's definitely a key issue to try to talk through at the local program and find a way to securely transport that data or enter that data. Another comment from Tom was that he was worried that asking for Social Security numbers will make Latino students more that fear immigration to choose not to participate out of fear. And that is entirely possible, but I think if you are upfront about why you're asking about that from the get-go and noting that you're asking that of everybody, and noting that even if they deny that it is they can or don't, you are still providing them service, I think that can be dealt with as in how you introduce this topic with students. I would also just note that all local programs are expected, even before this, they have been expected to ask all students for Social Security numbers before this point. So that part is not new, actually.
Yeah, and it's a frustrating trade-off, I guess, which is that the savings in terms of staff time that can be, and staff interest for that matter as well, that can go to direct programming, that in states that have to do survey follow-up are going to survey follow-up is, I think, potentially substantial. The data we get by data matching is better. It is frustrating because we actually don't really need to have a Social Security number to be able to data match into the higher ed system. It's just the unemployment insurance database that's problematic. And the reason there is that basically all that's in that database is first, last name, and social security number. So we can't do a match using anything else. I guess can't do a match in that system without having a social security number. So it's a, definitely a frustrating trade-off, but it's also important to be clear with students with the Tennyson warning. The truth of the matter is that a student could refuse to give pretty much any piece of information that we're asking for, and has the right to do so, and we would still be obligated to serve them. So if students are, really being given a Tennyson warning up front and have real concerns about data privacy, hopefully that helps to reassure folks that they have that option of not providing information.
We have some follow-up from Jenny and Mary about the reporting in SID. So Jenny notes that you please look at the handout to dig a bit deeper so you can see exactly which students do or do not have a social security number on file, so you could actually follow up with those students. And Mary adds that if you run the SID program summary data export report to see names of students, you'll see whether or not they have social security numbers on their record.
And then Penny's got her hand up. Penny will unmute you, and you can go ahead with your question or comment.
You are self-muted, Penny, so you will need to unmute yourself on your computer as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, just because I thought it'd be easier instead of typing this. One of the things that we do, just because we have more than one person do registration, so where it says social security number, when they don't want to give it, we make a line so we know we've asked them. But if they don't necessarily not want to give it, they might not know it, they might not have their card with them. So then when Julie, our data person, enters it and she sees that it's empty, then we actually do a follow-up with that person. So we know we've asked when we've crossed it out, and then we know that we can go ask again that they might just not have it. So, and we're a smaller program, we're at like 130 some students, but we have 82% social security numbers.
Well, that's great.
Wow.
It's a great tip.
Yeah,
Penny.
it is.
So we do, that might be a way to follow up without necessarily, I see Jenny had put, that don't have social security numbers, but I don't know, that's, I think, not a good thing to ask a student if they've already said no. Unless you're recording that, you're not going to know whether you asked them or if they said no, they don't want to give it. So that was just my 2 cents.
Excellent.
Yeah,
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then let's move on to the next section, and that is looking at data items or items 3 and 4 from the handout about time limits and data entry. So ultimately, our goal is to have accurate and timely data from each and every program. And so we're working with all of our ABE programs and other stakeholders to really think about how we can ensure that we get that data entered accurately and timely. So the expectation is that all of your program data is entered roughly within a month. New students, their intakes, pre and post tests, contact hours, and diplomas earned, whether that be a standard adult high school diploma or a credit completion or credit recovery diploma, and any other NRS required information. So we've had some folks that have been talking about that, how they have delays and they're thinking about how to shorten that timeline up a little bit to keep that within a month. But data should be entered within that month, ideally. So a couple of things that will help enforce this or kind of make sure that we have timely and accurate data, especially as we're doing our data polls and things that we need to do for our data matches. We're working with SID to implement a 3-month rolling lock, which is really fun to say. But that's a lock on student hours and student test data. So starting March 1st, any data that is you will no longer be able to add hours or tests that are more than 3 months old. And you will see an error message when you try to edit or add a test or hours that's more than 3 months old. And if you find we understand that maybe they'll still take some time to kind of accurately enter and monitor. So if you see an inaccuracy or something missing, you can contact SID support for assistance to try to get that data entered. But hopefully that'll be a very limited situation and not a regular occurrence. So start working towards that now, we encourage you. But we just want to really emphasize or make sure that you understand that. So starting March 1st, you can no longer enter data from November or earlier. Oh, I forgot I had that little.
Yeah.
So the example is starting March 1st, you can still enter data for December, January, and February. And then as March progresses, you can still enter data for December. And then time and test data from before December 1st, though, will be blocked. And then again, so this will kind of jump forward on the 1st of every month. On April 1st, users can enter class time and test for the previous 3 months, January, February, and March, but not for December. So it's going to be every month, every 1st, you'll see it'll jump a month forward. So hopefully you're thinking about this, or this is either not a problem for you already, or you're making plans to make sure that you have timely entry of your data. The second change that we're implementing is a limit on entering any hours or on entering hours, especially more than 12 hours, for students with no pretest or educational functioning level. You will not be able to enter student hours past the 12-hour mark for any students who don't have an educational functioning level. And you will see an error message when that occurs. That means that a student needs to be tested or that they weren't pre-tested appropriately. And so you will not be able to enter student hours. You also will not be able to add student hours past 30 hours for anyone that's labeled as a conditional work referral. If you are in a case where you frequently have conditional work referrals that are jumping over and becoming ABE students, my recommendation, and this will be added to the policy here soon, is that all your conditional work referral students get a pretest upon intake. And that will, help you in the case for those students that do transfer over, conditional work referrals that do transfer over to become ABE students. Second, it will also help you ensure or know where that conditional work referral, what their literacy level looks like, and it might help you develop a recommendation or potentially a recommendation for AB classes if they test really low. Or it'll help you know that maybe some of the materials you have for them are too high for them based on their reading level. And ultimately, then, this leads to what is item number 4 from the handout, and that is kind of our annual program data checklist and timeline. And so you can see here that we have various little checkpoints throughout the year. On June 1st, you're going to be submitting your grant application, and that'll include some data that will be all submitted via SERVs. So there'll be some tables submitted via SERVs as always. And that will largely be your hours data, your staffing data, and your the breakdown of the data in terms of how you utilize the funding across any entities, which you probably would not find in SID, but elsewhere. And then May-June data will be reviewed July 31st, entered and reviewed, because you will need to be submitting a report to Sherry by that point for that data. We also will be pulling some data and doing some data matches behind the scenes. And then it's also important that we have another deadline that all July through September data is checked by November 1st at your local end. Because while you don't have any submission to us at the Department of Education, we are going behind the scenes and pulling data for match with Department of Employment and Economic Development and with our post-secondary systems. So these are just kind of timelines that we need to keep, but ultimately these don't matter as long as you're entering data within a month and checking it within 3 months to making sure it's accurate. So ultimately, to review these pieces, enter your data within 1 month within the program and check that data within 3 months. All ABE students should have a pretest and a level, and at least 70% of your ABE students should have a full Social Security number in SID. One final reminder, we are starting the process with SID and Spark to develop reports on data monitoring to help you out, but also to help us out that would be used both at the state and local level. So I would like you to enter into chat, or you can raise your hand. What are some data monitoring tools that don't currently exist or reports would you like to see within the database? And we encourage you to enter those today. I think that you could also continue to send those to us via email. I've received a couple myself. SID staff, the SID support staff, Jenny and Mary, have received some as well. So keep sending us your ideas, either via email, or you can enter them into the chat right now, and we will consider those at our next Spark meeting at the beginning of February. Want to remind you about our next web chat. So we went December to January, and now we're going all the way to our next one won't be until May, and that will be in part following up on some of the grant application workshop topics. But it will be Wednesday, May 9th from 1 o'clock to 2:30. Ooh, I went the wrong direction. Thank you all for all of your help today and all of your great questions and insights. This is really helpful. I hope this has been informative for you as well. Please don't forget to fill out those evaluations. We ask for some additional follow-up information that we'll utilize for not only the May webinar, but also for our spring regional sessions and other events. So that will help us with our communication as well. So now we're going to open up the phone lines, open up the chat for any additional questions that you might have that you would want to see addressed today. But before we fully open it up for questions, please note that the recording of today's session, the PowerPoint, and the handouts will all be posted on the Literacy Action Network website. Okay. So at this point, we're opening it up for any questions. You can either raise your hand. Brent is, so we have, during the chat, we have some folks that are talking about ideas for data monitoring yet, so that's great. Keep adding those into the chat. Brent was also noticing about marketing that Kaplan is doing with GED Testing Service. And that is largely based off a promotion that Kaplan and GED Testing Service are developing together, utilizing I don't know if they have a joint venture or just some product. I believe it's a distance learning product that they've worked on together, where they have live classes that they use as a distance learning product that Kaplan sells and GED Testing Service has collaborated with. And they're packaging the use of that the license for that distance learning product, along with some practice tests and actual GED tests, all packaged together for a discounted price. And so they are promoting that within Kaplan and within GED Testing Service. I'm curious to know, Brent, what would you like to see done regarding their promotion of their product?
Yeah, one thing about that, Brent, is that it's likely that once Minnesota has gone through a procurement process, that whatever vendor or vendors is selected won't be able to use that channel for any sort of marketing. But in the absence of having gone through that process, we're sort of using GED Testing Center's system, like anybody else's. We haven't actually procured that system. We have a requirement, we have the option in Minnesota of, or not the option, we have the authority to award a high school credential to someone who passes the GED. But we don't have an actual contractual agreement with GDTS for using their test delivery system.
Not yet.
Not yet, anyway.
Scott was following up on that comment and saying, don't we, State of Minnesota and GED, work together that we could market that? So, Scott, are you asking that we market and promote the product that they're putting out there? I'm not sure what you're asking. Oh, so I think in a follow-up you said that you're saying, could we market emails to learners about AB products and classes? Locally, you can do that. We don't have an email address for every student or an email listserv for every student in the system, but locally, you could be setting up emails to your students in your programs and promoting whether it be the Kaplan products or your own programming as well within that. And any student that signs up to GED testings, to GED.com and sets up an account and they put that they're interested in your site, you can actually reach out to them via email to promote your programming as well. We do have a question on how do we unmute. To unmute yourself, Scott, if you want to follow up on the GED question, I will unmute you in just a second here, give you a chance to make sure that you're able to chat. Did you go?
I've got it. There you go. You need to unmute yourself, Scott, by clicking on your microphone icon. You're muted. There you go.
Good to go?
Yep, we can hear you.
Good to go? Okay. So my question is much like the marketing came out from Kaplan about their working in conjunction together, isn't there something, I mean, there's certainly benefits to GED for working with us. Is there a way that we could use their systems just to market to everybody, hey, you know, here's some of the ABE centers, here's the ABE center of the week in the metro, you know, and it could be completely, you know, just rotating, or the ABE center, you know, in this area of the state?
Scott, that's a great idea for the RFP that will be going out. That's something we could maybe have written into the RFP and that we could do so that we could promote adult basic ed for anybody who would be, you know, accessing the portal for test registration. So we don't really have a vehicle to do that right now, but we certainly could do that through the RFP that will be issued sometime later this year for one or, well, that will be a process for people to compete for that testing option. So thanks for the thought.
Thank you.
Okay, I know there's a bunch of other questions going on in the chat here right now.
Just wanted to mention quick, Penny indicated that the P2P grants actually have been posted, it looks like.
I haven't.
Julie's looking though. Penny, can you tell us where you saw those?
Yeah, I'm emailing my.
If you're still on. Well, we'll keep looking and see if we can see where those are posted, and then if they're up, we'll certainly get that information out to everybody.
Then we have another question about GED completion and gains. Chelsea writes, my understanding is that the program where the student first enrolls gets the level gain upon GED completion, correct? Is this true even when a student moves out of state or when a student moves to Minnesota from elsewhere?
Our goal, actually, for purposes of doing the report card in the future, will be to credit all outcomes that a student achieves during a year to all the programs that serve them. So when we report to the feds, we're reporting deduplicated information. We'd only report that outcome once. But in fact, when we report to the feds, we don't attribute that outcome to a local program anyway. But for local purposes, our goal is, and we still need to do some work on this within SID, but our goal would be so that a student who passes the GED ultimately and was served by 2 different programs within that program year, both would be credited for
the measurable skill gain.
The measurable skill gain, yeah.
The one exception to that would be if the student finishes their test and decides to get their diploma in another state, say Wisconsin or North Dakota or another state, in that case, the data actually goes out of our jurisdiction, and so we as a state include and then you as a local program don't actually know that they ever actually earned their GED diploma, because that data and their tests then become their record becomes only the only authority for that is the state that they completed in at that point.
I see Marty actually has the URL for the P2P
Here it is. Yeah.
posting. So anybody interested, you can see Marty's post that's third from the bottom of the chat post at the moment has the URL for where you can find the Pathways to Prosperity grant.
But it's so it's open. It looks like it's on the DEED website under open grants or in the contracts area.
Yeah, competitive grants.
Competitive grants.
And February 13th is the due date, 2008.
Geez, that's a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
So hopefully you've been working on your proposal. Well, I'm glad that you found that, because that's good news for us then as well, or helpful news for us.
Yeah, and every hour counts when it's that close.
Our understanding is that there's $18 million available to be distributed this year. So they're going to be giving a lot of grants, and I would assume that would mean that applicants' chances of being funded will be quite good.
And the informational webinar is January 22nd. It looks from 10 to 11:30. So yeah, it was just released today. So that would be a good thing for people who want more information on it, January 22nd.
Excellent.
And there's a question from Kirsten. She's looking to hear from any other ABE programs that are using TeachPoint to record PD participation and distance observation of staff. So if anyone is using that, if you want to type in the chat.
You said it's called TeachPoint or TechPoint?
She writes TeachPoint.
It's TeachPoint. Okay, excellent. Karen says that Mankato is using TeachPoint.
Okay.
Also, just want to know quick, you'll see that Jenny Schlickerbeer posted that she and Mary Zimmerly are planning to host some online web chats specifically focused on SID and on the data we use SID to store in the upcoming months. And she's indicating a tentative date of February 6th, but we're still trying to sort of work out dates that don't conflict and when the web chat platform is available. So keep an eye out for those postings, and we'll let people know as dates get firmed up.
That is the date of the Correctional Education Association conference. So
oh yeah.
we may need to go back to the drawing board on that one. And as Sarah notes, yes, the January 22nd is an adult diploma meeting, the date of the informational webinar.
What time did you say the webinar is, Julie?
It's, let's see, 10 to 11:30, January 22nd.
Always nice when our partners plan ahead.
Yeah. Karen, I don't know if you are interested in unmuting yourself and sharing any experiences with TeachPoint. We can do that. Otherwise, maybe you and Kirsten can just contact each other directly.
Sarah, and for anyone else that's going to be at the Adult Diploma Working Group, if you need to step out during that time, that's completely understandable. I don't have the ability to kind of end the agenda or stop out the agenda or work around that. You can see the tentative or the draft agenda, and that's pretty much the agenda we're sticking to. So hopefully, and I completely understand if you need to be a part of that webinar, what you could do then is hopefully coordinate with someone that will be in the working group that will not need to go, that will not need to participate in the webinar, and just kind of get notes from them. And we can talk on the 22nd, and I can even talk with you about that then too. And luckily, Sarah, we do have a secondary room reserved, so anyone, maybe a small group that needs to go participate in that webinar could go into that side room for that part of the day.
And Karen, it's Kirsten Fugleseth who's looking for more information about TeachPoint.
Okay. At this point, I think we're going to stop the recording, and but we can stay on for a little bit longer to answer any additional questions folks might have. But thank you all so much for all of your participation and all of your ideas. We have lots of great ideas here, both for MCIS, bridges to benefits, for data monitoring, and additional insights and thoughts for our field to keep making us stronger.